Good. Good on the community.
We're 3 minutes early.
There's a ceremony. Set point.
Jamie Owens. Oh, well, it was over at Kent Murray, which is on the other side. Freeway. Yeah, it's all him too. Him. So, well, he's very busy this week. Yeah. Yeah, this week's really busy.
Did we already sign the payroll? Oh, there it is. Went right by you. Apparently did. So right on by. It's perfectly fine with me. Check your bank balance in the morning. It'll be late. Don't say that. I hope that it's okay. It's okay. Go for it. Cycle.
She was just rip the bag open.
Okay. Save that.
Good evening. Welcome to the November 4th, 2024 regular city council meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Lowquist.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, call the roll.
Beauchamp, here. Goodlow, here. Lilquist, here. Elliott,
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Palmer,
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Okay, we will begin with proclamations. Our first is item 2A on the agenda, page 25, and I would like to introduce the Honorable Gerald Lewis, who serves as the Tribal Council Chairman for the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. He has served on Tribal Council for 15 years, including service as Committee Chairman for the Fish and Wildlife Committee and Culture Committee. Before joining the Tribal Council, Chairman Lewis's career was in fisheries management throughout the Columbia River Basin, for the Yakima Nation Fisheries Program. And when you guys speak, if you can do so at the podium there. Thank you.
Tonight, I want to thank the Ellensburg City Council for inviting us up. Tonight, this evening, I have two of my executive board members with me, plus attorneys, OLC attorneys. We have Mr. Ethan Jones and Mr. Alan Aronica, but his son, Tony Aronica, who is an attorney for Yakima Nation. I want to thank the City Council on behalf of this proclamation
which I will read into record. Native American Heritage Month, November 2024. Whereas in 1990, President H.W. Bush declared the month of November as National Native American Heritage Month. And whereas the United States currently recognizes 574 American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, of which 29 are located in Washington State. And whereas, as the first to live on this land, Native Americans and their traditions, values inspired and continue to inspire the ideals of self-governance, determination, and care for the earth. And whereas the Confederated Tribes and bands of the Yakama Nation settled on approximately 10 million acres of land, forming what is now known as Central Washington State. And whereas the city of Ellensburg recognizes and honors the descendants, living or not, of all Native nations residing herein and contributing to the strength and vibrance of the diverse community. And whereas it is essential to educate ourselves and our community about the histories and cultures of Native American tribes, foster a great appreciation for their contributions to our society. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Ellensburg does hereby proclaim November 2024 as Native American Heritage Month in Ellensburg and asks all residents to join in this observance by building bridges of understanding and friendship with members of the Yakama Nation and all of our Native American neighbors. Signed this 4th day of November, 2024. Rich Elliott, Mayor, attest by Beth Leader, City Clerk. Tonight, I want to share just a bit of history. When I began fisheries over 40 years ago and had worked with some biologists, and we had worked within the canyon coming up this way through Ellensburg and beyond towards Cle Elum. We were in search of areas that we thought was good for rock barbs to put into the river to try and slow the river down, especially areas that were chewn away by the advanced fish fast water, and to try and slow the water down some so that the banks against the rivers that went through the canyon, we wanted to slow it down so that there were areas for our small fish to actually lay and get some rest and look for food in the slow waters. And so we came up and discussed this with the county commissioners at that time, which was 3 commissioners that were sitting before us. And we were there to help cooperate with them, as well as our biologists who were giving the oral history on that, what we were trying to do. And so we presented this to the county commissioners, and they asked us if there was anyone left that wanted to speak. And so I raised my hand at that time. And so the head commissioner, he was the one that recognized me, and he says, "Go ahead and come on up and speak. I probably can't pronounce your name." He says, "But I'll allow you to speak." And so when I got up to the microphone, I let him know my name is Gerald Lewis, Geraldlewis. And so he kind of looked at me, kind of in disbelief. I know it was kind of out of gesture for him to be doing that, but I wanted to make a point for him that my name is just like yours. And so from that point on, he would recognize me as Gerald. But it was quite a meeting that was held at that time between county commissioners and from Ellensburg County and us from Yakima Nation, from stationed in Toppenish. So from that point on, we were recognized as Yakima Indians at that time. And the work that had gone on, though they didn't approve of that many barbs, we were still able to put a few of them in, especially right here up of near Ellensburg. And hopefully it had saved some lives by slowing that water down, as well as land, because we didn't want to see people losing their land that they worked so hard for. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'll turn it over to our vice chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott and fellow council members of Ellensburg. Iknaknawiksha Tachnanum. My name's Christopher Wallahy and my Indian name's Tachnanum. And, you know, just feeling the welcome and from you all is well received, allowing us as Yakima Nation tribal members to come and allow our chairman to read that proclamation into record, and that the acknowledgement of the Ellensburg city, you know, and then its members to is that me? Sorry about that. Oh, okay. Sorry. But, you know, on our travel here, you know, there's just certain things that were coming to mind en route, you know, and one thing that came to mind was our right to travel. And, you know, just, you know, observing the map you guys have on your wall and, you know, the territory that which it lays is, you know, the Yakima Nation's usual and custom lands. And, you know, just thinking of our ancestors utilizing this territory, you know, whether that's, you know, for the protection of our roots, our wildlife, and the land itself. And I know that each one of you share the same interest, because I know along with our programs, I know there's the, you know, the Springwood Ranch, the network that's going forward with our fisheries program. You know, I just want to make sure that it's highlighted that we already have a partnership. We already have collaborative efforts, you know, but I just think there's room for growth in that area. And, you know, for myself, you know, just reviewing you guys's, you know, work, it's evident that our nation and the city, you know, have common interests and goals, and for our memberships, you know, our community, whether that's homelessness, you know, for ourselves, we are tackling the same issues, you know, and I see that work's being done here, and I just want to, you know, extend a handout and maybe to continue our partnership and a collaborative efforts. And maybe that I've seen that our legal counsel has handed out his card, and maybe that we may continue to be connected and find other projects that we may tackle together and be great partners. So I extend that, and even as well as us traveling here, you know, I want to offer that as well to every first Tuesday of the month, Yakima Nation holds its own tribal council session. So I know our agenda is booked for this coming week, but maybe in the near future, if you would like to come visit our full council, not just our executive, because with our council, we have 14 members and 2 alternates. So maybe that could be something, you know, that you guys can visit our headquarters, and then we can continue discussion on things that we may collaborate with. And that's something that I wanted to express, because I know that we have members, tribal members up here, you know, just thinking of my family history, attending Central Washington University, or, you know, working up here. You know, there's tribal members that reside off reservation. So I know that. So, you know, I just want to make sure that, you know, my hand is extended out. And tonight we were well received, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Stephen Slam.
Nichklawet unisha shlishmolatum kushia patumki Stephen Salam kuchash yakama washnash yakama ku yakama knik. Good evening. My name is Stephen Salam. My Yakama name is Lishwalatam. Let's introduce myself in our language. Currently serve as Executive Secretary for our Yakama Nation Tribal Council. I just want to thank you guys a lot for extending this invitation, allowing our chairman to read the proclamation. And I just want to echo some of the sentiments that have already been said, but looking into the future about, you know, how we can work together, continue to work together, maybe come back next year again to do this. But even just figuring out ways that we can work together too. Because I was just looking at the beams up here and I was like, oh, we could have gave you some of the timber from our mill to build this. We recently had a partnership with Portland Airport where we were able to supply some of those timbers. And I think looking at some of those ways that we could partner in the future for not just the land, but also some of the economics. So I do want to reiterate and extend that invitation to come and visit us there, but also to come see some of our enterprises too. We currently operate various enterprises such as Yakima Power, a utility company, Yakima Nation Farms, in which we do some farming and vegetable farming, our land enterprise, which does fruit farming, and also Legends Casino too, down in Toppenish, to come and visit and see our area, so we can offer that same hospitality to all of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Present this to our mayor, to the mayor, as well as the full city council members, this flag that we have.
Nice.
Wow, that's beautiful. There you go, Rich.
If I could have one of our attorneys please speak as well.
Thank you. Ethan Jones, lead attorney for the Yakima Nation. I appreciate the opportunity to address the council this evening. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. We really appreciate and look forward to any opportunities there are for partnership and collaboration moving forward. I've handed out my contact information. I will also reach out to you after this and see if we can't explore what sort of collaborative efforts we can pursue together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hard act to follow there. We're actually going to add a second proclamation. This will be item 2B, and this is a Veterans Day proclamation. And I'm going to selfishly ask that I'm going to read this one. I attended my son's promotional ceremony to major with the Army yesterday, so that feels pretty cool. Okay. Whereas in 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower first proclaimed November 11th as Veterans Day, calling on Americans to solemnly remember the sacrifices of those who fought so valiantly on the seas, in the air, and on foreign shores to preserve our heritage and freedom. And President Eisenhower asked Americans to commit ourselves to the task of promoting peace so that our veterans' effort shall not be in vain. And whereas the members of our armed forces continue to be an inspiration to all of us through their demonstration of courage, leadership, and commitment in service to our community and to our country. And whereas communities across the nation participate in Operation Greenlight for veterans to shine a green light on November 11th to honor the service and sacrifice of veterans. And whereas the greatest acknowledgement of our freedom is to honor our armed forces veterans who have sacrificed and in many cases paid the ultimate price for our freedom. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Ellensburg proudly joins Kittitas County and the rest of our nation to shine a green light at City Hall, Ellensburg Police Department, the library on November 11th, and to salute and give special honor and recognition to those who have served in our armed forces and encourages all residents to promote peace. So we're on a very positive trend in this meeting. So item 3A is we're going to actually item 3A and 3B is we're going to acknowledge some outstanding performance.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Yes, and very good stuff before you tonight from our wastewater treatment plant. I'd like to introduce a few people. Coleman Miller is an engineer with Washington State Department of Ecology. He manages the city's wastewater treatment plant permit for the city. He's got some good information for you tonight. And then subsequent, Brian Cortese has another award. Brian works for the city of Ellensburg. He's an engineering technician with us that will present the second award. There's several members of our wastewater treatment plant here tonight. Feel free to stand up. If I've missed anybody.
Please do.
Please do.
Yeah.
I appreciate them coming out. It shows you how committed they are for being here on a Monday night and to their jobs. I think we have Dwayne Harper, James Luce, Michael Johnson, Chris Holmes, Brian Redlin, Ludwig Zavala, and then Dan Walker. Did I miss anybody? And Mike Helgeson is also here as well. So without further ado, Coleman.
Thanks, Ryan. Again, Coleman Miller from the Washington State Department of Ecology. We manage permits across the state for municipalities. Anybody who discharges into a river or ocean or lake or anywhere, even groundwater, any water of the state, we manage the permit for that discharge. And I appreciated the words spoken earlier by the gentleman about collaboration, because it really is a team effort. As a regulatory agency, sometimes it doesn't feel like we're a team, but we really are. We work collaboratively with cities like Ellensburg, which work out a really great relationship where they're assigned a permit and they don't get to have much say in what's in it. But there's a lot in it. There's a lot that goes into that permit. Every permit is customized to the situation, to the treatment plant and all the surrounding circumstances. And there's a lot of requirements, including recording or reporting, sampling, and actually treating the water and making sure the water is clean when it goes into the river. And as we know, the water quality benefits and the water quality problems of a place aren't isolated to that place. You know, our beautiful, majestic water system in this state, you know, runs from the mountains to the oceans and goes through all of our communities and tribal areas, and it really does take everyone being conscious of that, being aware of the need to have clean water and being able to enjoy that clean water as citizens of this great state. So This award is for outstanding performance for the year 2023. And it signifies that the city of Ellensburg was perfect in complying with their permit and all that went into the permit for that whole year. So congratulate these guys and everything that they did and appreciate all of their work.
Couple slides, so bear with me really fast.
Don't forget to share.
You know how to share.
IT's running you down right now.
It's a race. It's a race. Oh, he's got it. He's got it. He's got it. It's there. Just about.
Hi, I'm Brian Cortese and I work in the engineering department for Public Works at the city of Ellensburg. And I'm here tonight. I'm honored to be here tonight to share the 2024 American Public Works Association Empowering Teams Award. And this recognizes teams making advancements in the public works industry that allow the industry as a whole to make significant progress in harnessing new technologies, processes, or materials to accomplish public works tasks more efficiently. And the winner this year is the city of Ellensburg's wastewater treatment facility crew, Ronnie Cunningham, Dan Walker, Ludwig Zavala, James Luce. Ray Mayo was also part of the team. Mike Johnson and Brian Redland, who's not pictured here, but they're all here tonight. And if they could come up really fast, I'd like to present this to them in front of the city council, please. Just to go over what they did to accomplish this award. Recently, the city has embarked on plans to upgrade the wastewater treatment facility. And in that process, we soon realized that our historical data wasn't exactly what we hoped it was. And we reached out to this crew and they stepped up to the plate immediately. And what they did out in the field was collect manhole rim and invert elevation points throughout the city. We initially went for the priority mains, and which was about 1,400 different points that they collected with 2 GPS rovers, which gives us sub-centimeter accuracy on those points. What this is going to allow us to do is make plans for upgrades to the wastewater treatment facility, but also give us long-term maintenance abilities with the entire wastewater system and establish plans for future growth. We're extremely proud of these guys, and they just did an excellent job and really stepped up above and beyond. They initially collected about 1,400 points for us, but over the summer, they went above and beyond again. And right now we have about 95% of the wastewater system collected, and which is going to lead to a lot of good things for us for mapping the system and being able to maintain it into the future. So please join me and congratulate these guys for job well done.
Thanks, you guys.
Fantastic job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. You're amazing.
No offense to anybody at previous meetings, but this meeting's a lot more fun than.
Here, here.
Okay, item 4, approval of the agenda.
Mayor, I move for approval of the agenda.
Second.
So we have a motion and approval of the agenda. This is an amended agenda just for people in the audience. If you have an old version, if you have an item 11C and D in your packet, both of those have been eliminated. Item 11C, just because they're not ready for that. And item 11D was actually handled in the study session. So what's before you may not look like the agenda, but the updated agenda is what we're talking about. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Opposed? That motion passes. Consent agenda.
Mayor, move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye opposed. That motion passes. We have no petitions, protests, or communications. We move on to item 7, which is citizen comment on non-agenda items. While they're collecting that, just a couple of things. One, we did have somebody sign up online, but the subject that they were looking for information on was actually handled through a different process, so that's been handled. And we have 3 individuals who have asked to speak to the council. And again, just a reminder, these are items over which the council has control, concerns the city business, and is not on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, no political conversation whatsoever, especially tonight. Everybody, okay, we'll just go in the order. Mr. Coleman, and you've got last week's 2117 vote.
Good evening, William Coleman, resident of Kittitas. As you all well know, my purpose for these meetings is to show up, listen for dumb stuff, and then be as loud and obnoxious as possible. Last week's vote on 2117 on whether the city should take a stand publicly on one of the citizen initiatives is one of those things that butters my bread. And I was sorry I missed that meeting because I would have loved to have done a write-up on that. But I'm going to go in a different direction tonight, and thank you for the outcome of that vote. You did the right thing, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Josh Delano, Mayor Elliott, Nancy Loquist, and Sarah, thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, Mr. Erke, and this is intro to Ellensburg Family Foundations.
Yes, thank you. I've got a little speech here that I'm gonna read off of, and so my name is Joel Erke, and thank you, Mayor Elliott and council members, fellow community members and partners. Really appreciate your time. So I'm gonna try to make this as brief as I can. I'm here to represent and introduce you guys to Ellensburg Family Foundations, or we call it EFF or F. We're a newly created, community-driven nonprofit organization that knows firsthand the real need for appropriate, need-supported, affordable housing for people with disabilities right here in our city. Each and every member of our foundation has a family member that is coping with some level of disability, physical, cognitive, developmental, social. This is the common thread that ties our group together. Our purpose is to provide residences for adults living with disabilities here in Kittitas County through raising of funds and managing donations to support this cause. Our current executive board members are myself, Joel Erke, Kathy Sand, and Linda Hall, all of Ellensburg, Washington. Our group was formed kind of on a word of mouth basis, but mainly by the hard work of 2 individuals, Anna Soli and Amy Moeller, who they've been facilitating and hosting monthly meetings for about a year now. So I'd like to thank them for their hard work. So briefly, just some numbers to think about. From the 2023 DSHS Developmental Disabilities Administration Annual Caseload and Cost Report, states there are 239 individuals in Kittitas County, specifically 53 children, 186 adults, who currently receive some sort of benefit from the state, depending on their disability level. So understand that most of these people, other than being challenged with a disability, are healthy and they're going to live long lives. They'll likely outlive their caregivers, their parents, siblings, possibly. So just think about that. Those 239 people could very possibly be homeless at some point
here in our own county. So this is it's a important issue that needs to be considered. So our current email address has 25 people on it, our email list. And I know that there are even people in our group who.
Mr. Durkee, if you can kind of wrap it up and
Okay.
I'll give you some more at the end.
Okay, yeah, there's, the need is big and it's just something that we would love to partner with you guys with in the future. Like I said, we're a new group, just got our 401(c)(3), we're a nonprofit, and we have needs that vary from single family residences to possibly apartments that we're trying to make progress on and work with you guys in the future to make things happen here in our county. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And that was just a brief introduction to who we are and what we do.
And the follow-up is that this is very much front and center for us in terms of affordable housing and housing for all different groups in the community. So we will make sure that you're made aware of the meetings that subject's on the agenda. Teresa Plouffe, and this is the city council meeting, last city council meeting, sequestration of state election initiative.
Okay, as some of you know, I spoke up at the last meeting and I came to it to watch the city council take their vote, and that, thank you for all of your opinions on that, even the dissenters. I realize that it's a tough position being a part of the city council and weighing in on things. As a member of the public, I feel my role is different than you guys up there. And I just want to, and maybe I don't understand, and in the past, you've been really good at reaching out to me through emails and stuff, because this is just my comment and I know that you can't answer me. But I don't understand why that was on the agenda in the first place, how it got there. It was very much something that's on a ballot for each one of us who needs to vote as a citizen or a resident of Washington State. To me, that's a very private and personal issue on how I vote. Although when I got to the meeting, I realized that I had a unique perspective on how government programs cannot provide for certain people. I went back to the giveaway programs, and I will never qualify for any help at my place. I am still going to have to keep heating with wood, which is not good for my lungs right now at this age. And it's because, from what I understand, they base it on your electrical consumption in the past, and I have been cutting down my electrical consumption for years. So I won't fit their equations. So sometimes the equations just don't fit. And the other thing is that when we separated the two groups, I felt like I needed to speak up because nobody else was here to speak up for or against. There were people here against the initiative, and then there was nobody here to speak up about the problems with it. And I felt that I went along with it, but when I went home and I reflected about it, I just wish that I had said that I don't even quite understand why that was allowed to go on and continue in the meeting. Why, if there's something in your city rules that say that you must take public comment at that point when you had decided to not vote on it, I just ask you, if there is not, would you please reflect on that and maybe discuss amongst you if it might be better not to involve a political issue at all that's going to be on a ballot, because it tends to separate people a little bit, I think, and I just want us all to work together. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak on a non-agenda item? Seeing none. Again, we had nobody who qualified online. I mean, just answer the question, because we're trying to be a little bit more flexible here. The city council's elected bodies are permitted to take a collective position on ballot initiatives when they concern the jurisdiction. And once we initiate something with public comment, we're bound to let that go through the process. So that answers the questions. We're moving on to item 8A, which is a public hearing, which is legislative, and they gave me 3 different scripts to make it easy for me. Okay, the purpose of this hearing is city council to consider first reading of ordinance 4947, which would establish the ad valorem property tax levy for 2025. The public hearing is now open. I ask for your permission in the following procedure. Everyone will be given an opportunity to be heard. City clerk is making a recording of the proceedings. If you wish to participate in the hearing, this is virtually. You raise your virtual hand on Zoom or you press *9 if you're on the phone, and wait till you've been recognized and have been unmuted. You should then begin stating your name and address and indicate whether you're speaking for yourself individually or a spokesperson for a certain group or both. Speak slowly and clearly. Only one person will be allowed to speak at a time, and testimony must only address the matter under which is consideration of this hearing. Any questions of staff are to be directed through council. Each person will have the opportunity to address council for an initial period not to exceed 5 minutes. If more time is needed, it will be made available after everyone has had an opportunity to speak. And before we hear from the audience, is there a staff report?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Jerica Pasco, Finance Director for the City of Ellensburg. So a public hearing is being held for the purposes of City Council consideration of and receiving public comment on the proposed 2025 revenue sources supporting the activities of the general fund. As set forth by state statute, the City Council shall receive information on the estimated general fund revenues from all sources for the current years, as well as estimates for the following budget period. Council must also hold a public hearing on revenue sources for the taxing districts following year's current expense budget. For the purposes of RCW 84.55.120, the current expense budget means that the budget, which is primarily funded by taxes and charges and reflects the provisions of ongoing services. It does not include capital, enterprise, or special assessment budgets. The hearing must also, sorry. The hearing must also include consideration of possible increases in property tax revenues and must be held prior to the consideration of adopting an ad valorem tax ordinance for 2025. Estimated 2025 revenues have been prepared to determine the availability of revenue to support the city's financial needs of the general government in 2025. The city's 2025-26 biennial budget considers the estimated available revenues and anticipated financial requirements and will recommend an amount to be raised by ad valorem taxes in 2025. General fund estimates are presented in the attachment beginning on page 42 of your agenda. And upon conclusion of this public hearing on revenue sources, staff will present first reading of the 2025 ad valorem property tax ordinance. On the first page here, want to talk about what do the general fund activities actually include. So our general fund activities that we're speaking about tonight include council, management, general government, economic development, finance services, community development services, parks and recreation, engineering, library, and public safety. A majority of the expenditures are funded with tax revenues, which include property tax at 3.6 million, sales tax, B&O taxes, which include utility taxes, other fees and taxes, and our beginning fund balance of about 9.2 million. The general fund also includes the following funds: City General Sales Tax Reserve Fund, the Art Acquisition Fund, Hal Homes and Library Trust Funds, and the Fire Relief and Pension Fund. The general fund does not, however, include all governmental funds that are supported by some of these same taxes that we'll talk about tonight, such as streets, arterial streets, debt, and capital construction. Here we have 2025 projected revenues for the general fund. This gives a percentage breakdown of the estimated revenue sources. So the largest revenue source for the general fund, again, is taxes at about 69%, followed by charges for services, which is 21.9%. And I should also note that those charges for services are mostly made up of interfund charges. So those are charges to our other funds, such as our utility funds for services that finance, city manager, council, and stuff does for them. Next would be intergovernmental revenues, which is mostly grants and interlocals at 3.5%, license and permit fees at 2.7%, miscellaneous at 2.4%, 4%, which is majority interest, and fines and penalties at 1.1%. So overall, our 2025 projected revenues has a total projected revenue source of about 21.45 million, an estimated beginning fund balance of about 9.2 million, so a total available balance of 30.67 million or 30.68. I should also note that when these revenue sources were done and this agenda report was turned in, we continued to make adjustments to our budget. So when Heidi speaks later on the budget, some of these numbers are going to be different because we continue to try to update our projections and numbers. A breakdown of the 2024-25 general fund taxes. So with taxes being the largest general fund revenue source, we show a breakdown by tax type and compare it to the current year estimates. Property tax on the first line there, this includes a 1% increase, shows the estimates of 2024 of 3.6 million, bringing it to an estimated of 3.68 million for 2025. B&O taxes, you'll see our estimates for 2025 slightly decrease compared to 2024. And this is because we received a lot of late revenues for our utilities based on the new utility billing system. And so when we receive those revenues, since we're cash basis, that's when the city receives the utility tax on those. Then sales tax, we used a 1% increase. So we're projecting to see from about 7.02 million to a 7.09 million. And then not much change in the other admissions and real estate excise tax.
Real quick, on the B&O taxes, the revenue that you're talking about, will there be an adjustment later on in 25 that will increase that number?
Yes, and those
Yeah.
continue to
Yeah.
change and increase.
Yeah. We're gonna have you do yours, and then we'll have you finish your report, and then we'll do.
Questions after that?
Sorry.
Got it. Yep, no problem.
Alana went rogue.
I also should note that this includes the department, the 015 local criminal justice, that does not include the 130 fund or the 3/10 of 1% sales tax, nor does it include the 1/10 of 1% sales tax for affordable housing or the 2/10 for transit, because those are not included in the general fund but are in special revenue funds. So we, just as a reminder, again, we have limited control over the taxes as a revenue source. State statute limits increasing the property tax to 1%. The utility taxes are really dependent on weather rates and consumption. And the sales tax has many economic factors, with construction being one of the most volatile in what we see. The next chart shows the 24-25 revenues excluding taxes. Charges for services, again, are our next highest. But again, that is mostly includes interfund charges to other funds. So when we increase the budget for that to the general fund, that increases the expenditure budgets to our other funds. Fines and penalties, we're expecting a slight increase due to late fees and miscellaneous. You're seeing a decrease here of just over $1 million to about $500,000, and that's because most of miscellaneous is interest. We tried to budget conservatively for that, knowing that some of our interest rates are expected to drop on some future investments, but majority of the decrease you'll see there is because the fund balance for the general fund has decreased. So that means we have less money to invest, and thus our investments interest earned is going to decrease. Intergovernmental revenue, you see quite a decrease there, and that's because that's mostly made up of grants. And we haven't received or budgeted for our grants for 25 and 26 yet. And then, of course, licenses and permits. So I should also note that in 2024 estimates, one of the larger numbers in there includes a $900,000 grant that we had for fish as a pass through. So that's part of the decrease that you're seeing there. Let's see. And community development and parks and recs, I think we'll be bringing forward to you fee changes in the near future to hopefully increase some of our charges for services. Next one shows the 24-25 projected revenue by major source. So all 2024 estimates compared to 2025. So you can kind of see the bigger picture here. Overall, our revenue source estimates are down 1%, mostly due to grants and interest. There is significant uncertainty on the outlook of controlling inflation and the timing and the length and the severity of a possible recession if we are already in one, as well as the impacts it may have on the revenue projections here. But we have done our best to continue to try to update these numbers. But like I said, this is the first process in our budget process coming up with estimates for our revenues, and then we move into the expenditures at a later time. So 2025 sales tax support here. Sales tax is one of the largest revenue sources available to cities. So it feels important to give you a little bit more information on the sales tax trend and what it supports. So our sales tax trend, which is a part of our general fund, it is a managerial fund of the general fund, supports streets. About 28% currently of our sales tax goes to streets, and 63% or 5.4 million was going to the general fund, things like public safety, library, parks and recreation, community development, all those things we talked about. And then about 9% or 748,000 right now is going to bonded debt. The chart below it right there shows our regular retail sales tax in the blue, and then the portion that we receive for construction there in the red. And that's just to try to kind of show you that the green line too is our one-time spending project. So we constantly talk about, since construction sales tax is volatile, we try to use that on one-time spending. So that shows you how we're using that. Most of the time it's on arterial street projects. But I also wanted to show here, and I don't know if this is the greatest chart to represent that, but our regular retail sales tax has continued to slowly increase except for 2020. But when you combine it with construction down there in the red, it's starting to flatten off. So on the next chart here, you'll kind of see this. This shows our percentage of increase in regular retail sales year over year. So except for 2018, which was because we switched to cash basis. So that's why you see the decrease there. And you see in 2019, sales tax was up 7%. 2020, post-COVID, was down 1%. Then we saw an increase in 21 and 22, and then ending with 2023, we had literally had a 0% increase. It was less than 8%. And as of August, which would be June sales of 2024, we're just at a 1%. So finishing out our reporting, showing the trend of sales tax month to month or seasonally. And I don't know that you can see it real great here. It's kind of small too, but collections are up and down month to month, but overall they usually follow somewhat of a seasonal trend. This year, however, it appears to be quite different. And that is kind of that top line there in the dark blue. I don't know if you can see it, but it was kind of following the seasonal trend up. And then it took in May a dip, and it's just gone down from there. It's starting to go down May, June, and into July. And so that's the revenue trend that we're trying to follow and level out with the rest of our revenues. Staff recommends council conduct the public hearing and consider information received. No further action pending the 2025 ad valorem property tax ordinance first reading that's set to follow after this public hearing. And I can answer any questions.
Actually, we're going to continue on our script so that we stay on target. Okay, the floor is open to testimony from the public. Each person will have an opportunity to address the council for initial period not to exceed 5 minutes. More time is needed will be made available at the end. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak on this topic? Nobody online? Okay, staff, you don't have anything to add? Nobody in the audience wants to add additional information. Now, council, do you have any questions?
Better be good.
Hey, you were the guys that led a Texan on this council, so that's on y'all. So there you go. Thank you for the report. I do appreciate it. So going back to my comment, this was on page 5. This is the city revenues general fund, the revenue source. You were talking about the actually I had 2 questions. First, on the 24-25 revenues general fund taxes. That decrease in B&O taxes that you talked about, you were starting to, there's going to be a revenue adjustment sometime in 25 that should get us closer to where we were at in 24, correct?
Yeah, so we started out with these estimates based on knowing that our revenues were high for our B and O taxes this year because we had revenue that was billings for 2023 that were received late in 2024. Plus, I don't know if you remember when I spoke at, I believe it was second quarter, that we also had an increase in those utility revenues based on the building code fee changes and people rushing to get permits in and having plant investment fees on those. But throughout our budget process, we've adjusted our estimates on the 25 utility taxes based on what the departments or the funds for the actual utilities are expecting their revenues to be. So since there are some rate increases and other adjustments there, we've tied a formula to that based on that. And so you'll see in Heidi's presentation of the budget that those have increased somewhat from our first projections.
Okay, thank you, Jerica. And then my two last questions here. If you go to your slide with the general fund and other revenues, you talked about fines and penalties. Just curious, the increase that you were talking about, is that an increase in the late fee penalties themselves, or is this an increase or a shortening on the time in which something is qualified as late?
If you remember, again, it has to do with our new utility billing system. So because we went live last December, we waived any late and utility late fees and penalties for the first half of the year.
Gotcha.
And now that those are in place, we're starting to incur that revenue.
Okay. And then the last question here is regarding the intergovernmental revenue, specifically your comment regarding grants. So I would take it that if we were to pick up grants for, say, the field house, that would get reflected in that figure, or no?
Possibly. It depends on where we put it. We actually have a fund specific for the field house fund. So if we saw a grant, it would probably go in that fund and not be mixed in with the general fund.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thank you. The public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Council may now begin its discussion and deliberation.
Well, I'll take it off. Mr. Mayor, I move first reading of proposed ordinance 4947 establishing the ad valorem property tax levy for 2025.
Second.
We have a motion second to conduct first reading of ordinance 4947, which is the ad valorem property tax levy for 2025. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Opposed? That motion passes.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ellensburg, Washington, levying property taxes for the City of Ellensburg for the fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2025 on all property in said city which is subject to taxation for the purpose of paying sufficient revenue to carry on general operations, recognize voter approved levies, and pay debt service obligations of said city as required by law.
Need to breathe in the middle there. Okay, item 8B, which is a public hearing. Again, this is 2 of 3, page 77 in your packet. This is the preliminary 2025-2026 biennial budget. Again, there will be an opportunity in the public hearing process for public comment. We have the same audience in the room and the same audience online, so I have to read every word. All right. The purpose of this hearing is for the city council to consider the preliminary 2025-2026 biennial budget. Hearing is now open. We ask for your cooperation. Everyone will be given an opportunity to be heard. The city clerk is recording the proceedings. If you wish to participate virtually, raise your virtual hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. Wait till you're unmuted and then you will be given an opportunity to speak. You should begin by stating your name and address, whether you're speaking for yourself individually, a group, or both. Speak slowly and clearly. One person can speak at a time. Testimony must only address the matter under consideration of this hearing. Questions of staff are to be directed through council, and every person will have an opportunity to speak for a period not to exceed 5 minutes, and we'll provide more time at the end if needed. Before we hear from the audience, is there a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there is. Well, good evening, council and Mayor Heidi Barron Sternaway, City Manager. And I am very pleased to present you the preliminary budget. We call this preliminary because, as Jerica mentioned earlier, that as we move through bringing in the actual numbers for revenue as we close out the year and looking at the expenditures as we close out the year, the numbers continue to change. And so this is the first time that that we've put all of the pieces together. This work represents hours and hours across our city organization of our staff working together, and primarily hours and hours of our finance team. And so I just want to appreciate all the work. All right. So when we put together a biennial budget, that means we're looking ahead 2 years, trying to figure out where we're going and looking at the factors from the past and indicators in the economy. We've talked over the last 2 weeks. We've had 2 budget workshops talking about the revenues and the challenges of balancing this budget. The primary influence and difficulty in this is really inflation. The expenses across the board, anybody goes to the grocery store knows that everything we buy costs more. And so when it comes to labor, when it comes to projects, when it comes to doing everything that we've done for the city over the past few years, the costs have gone up. And our revenues, as Jerica just reflected, have been fairly flat the last 2 years. And so we are not the only city that's having this challenge. In fact, we're probably in a better position than a lot of communities. A lot of communities are making some major cuts right now. So we've done our very, very best to use every tool in the financial toolbox to balance this budget. And so we'll walk you through really the picture of the revenues and expenditures as we put those together. And again, these are things that we're anticipating. We know this means change. And so we've also tried to be responsible when we're making recommendations for change. I call this an adaptive budget, and adaptive in such that there are so many factors that contribute to the budget and how we actually do business as a city. If you recall, I've said before, the budget is a policy document. It's not just a financial document. It's got numbers in it that reflect your priorities and the community needs, and we try to balance those interests out. So we're working hard to respond to the current conditions. They have changed. They're different than they were 2 years ago. We know a little bit more, but also what the future holds really is a pretty significant amount of uncertainty. The budget we presented is balanced. It continues most services, and you're going to see a slight change in some of the services that we're proposing. It considers your council vision that you created together, saying these are the things that are important to our community as we look forward, continues to invest in technology. And also it does propose, and this is sort of the big thing, we'll talk about this at the very end too, a public vote to renew the TBD is the Transportation Benefit District, which currently funds transit. We've done a tremendous amount of staff work to look at, could we continue to fund operations of transit and capital needs over the next 10 years? If our grants revenues will continue, and could we fund that at a lesser amount? And our staff projections are yes. So the recommendation is to actually bring the voted measure back to the community. It's scheduled to sunset in September of 2026, asking you to bring that back a year early in 2025, and actually ask the voters to keep that same rate, but distribute that both to transit and street maintenance. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we move forward. You've seen this someday. We'll have to update my image for the toolbox. We can probably do a little better, but when we look at where the balance, how do we balance the budget? There are revenue factors and there are expenditure factors. And again, we've tried to adjust as many of those as we can. Your council strategic vision, this is at your retreat, the things and the elements that you worked on at a high level. You said these 5 things are the things that are really important to our community. Doesn't mean we should stop, arresting criminals and stop providing permits to people. It means as we grow and as we look at the needs and the health of our community, what are the things and how do we want to sort of shape our services and invest in our services? And so again, the priorities that we set have reflected as many of those. Over the last couple meetings, we've talked about the complexity of the budget. When our finance director talks about governmental funds or the general fund, we're primarily talking about this group of services. When we talk about governmental funds, it really means that general fund, those special revenue funds that have some restricted revenues in them, the capital funds, and then also the debt service funds. And we tried to do some color coding in your slides too, so you can follow these. The proprietary funds are those funds that act like their own businesses. And this is really important as we look at this budget. These enterprise funds, which are again, our utilities. And so our water customers pay for the water services. Our sewer customers pay for those sewer services. Each of these utilities has to operate like its own business. And so the revenues and expenditures within those have to balance out, and they have to operate like their own business. We can't use tax dollars to supplement those dollars, those funds, and we can't use those funds to supplement other expenditures. And then we have our internal services funds, and these are the things that are like our fleet. And so that we save money each year in order to make sure that we can reinvest in our fleet when it comes time to replace. We pay for IT services. These are shared services that are charged back to the certain funds. So, and as we've talked about, one of the biggest pressures is really funding these general services. If we look at the budget that we've prepared for the preliminary budget, if we add both years of budget, this is just, to me, this is an opportunity to look at the scale. The general fund is by far our largest fund. And again, this is 2 years of activity. And so under our utility funds or enterprise funds, the light fund is one of our largest. And again, these aren't all just expenditures. These include fund balances as well. So making sure that we're not going to spend this all, but this is again for scale, and our natural gas and the rest of our utility funds, and then our internal service funds. And these again in blue are our special revenue funds, and those have again generally restricted use. They're for a specific purpose. So when we talk about those governmental activities, those are a little broader than the general fund activities. The general fund activities are those shared revenues. When Jericho was talking earlier about the primarily tax-based funding for these, these are those, and also include some of those restricted funds, which are like the transit or the affordable housing, and the 130 fund, which we call that's the criminal justice fund that was voted for a very specific purpose to fund criminal justice services. The rest are generally general fund activities, which are primarily funded with tax dollars and some of those charges for service and some of the grants as well. So when we're looking at the general fund, and that's that smaller subset of activities, when we look at the revenues going in, again, primarily we're looking at the taxes. What I added in this slide that's different from the finance director is the beginning and fund balance. Oftentimes we program the beginning fund balance in, and we work really hard to not spend and make sure we can continue to use to keep the fund active and balanced throughout the course of the biennium. And again, these are exactly the same as the previous presentation. For the charges of goods and services, take a portion of or include a portion of that revenue. So for 2025, we're looking at including fund balance about a $32 million general fund revenue. And for 2026, it's a little bit less, about 29,000. One of those you'll see is the difference is we're in, as we move through 2025, we're starting 26 with a smaller beginning fund balance. And so we're using up a little bit of that beginning fund balance and balancing our budget. So as we look at the expenses, here's where we start putting the pieces together. And again, these are focused on general fund. And this is a little bit misleading. Our police department, if we actually included in the 130, the special revenue funds that are restricted for criminal justice, this slice of the pie would be a lot bigger. These are those primarily tax funded activities. And if we look at the split between the departments, essentially, this is what we're looking at. And so again, by numbers, one of the larger is our Parks and Recreation. Our non-departmental really are those funds that we spend, for instance, for other services. And so we're paying our fire protection services out of this fund. So general non-departmental services and our legislative as well. So those are our 2025 expenses, looking at about $26 million. And for 2026, we're looking at roughly the same. We tend to try to be very conservative when we're budgeting revenues and we're looking at expenditures. We've really tried to whittle down any of the impacts, especially on the general fund, and not do a whole lot of expansions, and in fact, do a little bit of contracting. If we break down those same expenses by the type of activity, when we talk about, often we'll say our people are our most important asset, and they are. We spend about 70% of our general fund, and you'll see that number reflected here too on benefits and salaries for our people, the people that really do the work for the city. And so when we look at interfund services, these are the things that, for instance, our general fund will pay into IT services or geographic GIS services, things like that, or, building rentals, things like that. Our intergovernmental services are where we pay, for instance, KitCom for our call outs, and our regular standard services will include like professional services where we hire consultants to support the work that we do, and some of our leases as well. So again, the majority of the types of expenditures for the general fund are primarily people. And so again, back to 2025, we're looking at about a $22 million expenditure, and the same and again, these are broken out a little bit differently, so you don't capture all of the expenses from the previous breakdown. Okay, so as we look at what enhancements we're trying to make, I'd like to focus on those for a little bit before we get to the challenging news. And that is, this is not a contracting budget. We're not making major cuts. What we're trying to do is really maximize the use of revenue and create efficiencies, and also, again, make really smart decisions. And so when it comes to, we've done a lot of growth and expansion and made a lot of progress, and our staff are really tired, and they're ready to slow down a little bit. So this adaptive budget actually works really well for, I think, the pace that the organization. So we're doing a lot of continuing. We started partnering for the CHIP grants for connecting housing to infrastructure. We have a number of partnerships. Continuing to work with our housing and grants coordinator who came on in the last biennium to help us maximize and make sure we're starting to do the implementation of our housing action plan. Moving forward, we know we have our periodic update for the comprehensive plan coming up. So we have some consultant services. And just a reminder, we don't log in and we don't include grant revenues in our revenues until we actually get the grants. And so we might plan for projects, but we don't include the revenue until we know it's coming. And we've been pretty good about getting grants. And so we know that we can include some of those as we move forward. And there's a small amount, and this is only a couple $1,000 for warming and cooling shelter staffing. Our library and health homes folks, we've opened during summer hours and in winter hours when it's extreme cold, and making sure that we have the budget to continue to support that. For your sustainable economic development, really continuing to maintain our infrastructure systems, and continuing to build those, making very strategic investments, especially with our utilities and transportation. This is a growing community, and we don't ever want to get behind, because that's when you have building moratoriums and things like that. And so making sure that we know what the future holds, and then we're creating policies, and we're creating the infrastructure in order to meet those long-term needs. And then continuing the work with the creative economy and entrepreneurial sector, working with the county folks to implement the countywide economic development strategic plan, and then actively participating in all of the countywide and regional collaboration activities that are going on to make sure we're making thoughtful investments in economic development. When it comes to safety, civic engagement, and cultural inclusion, we're looking at, last year we had planned looking at the changes in the case law. So, and also the state law where public defense services, the county stood up its new office. And so the city will be asked to contribute to that service as we move forward. That's a new service for us. Continuing the DEI Commission support for those initiatives, accessing, there's an accessibility requirement that's coming down from the feds with a 2027 guideline or deadline, and making sure that that all of our online services are compliant with that 2027. So there's some funding in there to help us out with a consultant to make sure all of those third-party online software programs are compliant with that as a public agency. Continuing our civic education, and this is more of an in-house thing. We've started our Ellensburg Academy, and continuing engagement is really important, hearing from people. And as our media landscape changes, our communications have really become an essential services. And then finding spaces where we can educate and listen to our community members is continuing important. So continuing the resources for those. And then increasing the tools for modern policing. There's some minor enhancements for use of technology, drone technology, and things like that, making sure that we have the money to replace our car cameras and that we're keeping up with all of the technology that helps folks do their job more efficiently and safely. So infrastructure and energy, there's a whole lot that we've continued to include in our budget. A lot of these, again, are utility funded primarily. And so our utilities, we look at those revenues on a regular basis. And so there's outside the general fund. And so they've kept up better than the rest of our funds. And so one of the major things that we're looking at is doing a reorganization. We've talked about in the past, and that is splitting up the Public Works and Utilities Department. A little over 5 years ago, that department was actually merged together. We all know, you all know, with all the regulation going on, especially in energy, we need more capacity, and we need a little bit of growth in order to stay ahead and make sure we are capturing the opportunities for our community. And we found out too, not having a seat at the table when it comes to the regulatory environment, we sort of get left out of the conversation. So making sure that we continue to invest in the legislative advocacy, especially for our energy utilities. We have some grant funded things in process right now. Our comprehensive urban forestry plan, continuing that work. I think you just signed an agreement for about a $270,000 project that's going to take us through the next year plus, and to upgrade our tree code and maintenance and things like that. And then continuing with finishing out the HERE grants for the renewable energy, and also other renewable energy and conservation programs, and continuing investments again in our technology. We have a technology roadmap we've been working on to make sure we bring our community and our services into the 21st century. And there's a tremendous amount of work behind that and investment behind that as well. And again, making sure that we're thinking strategically. Sometimes we have the opportunity to come to get a grant, and again, make sure that we're set to take care of contingencies. So we often we budget a little contingency for projects that might come in a little bit over, or we have opportunities to take advantage of new opportunities for funding. The budget also completes the Gateway 2 and project, and we start on what we're calling Gateway 3, which is the gap between Alder Street and the beginning of Gateway 2, and completing the Reeser Creek levee extension for that flood mitigation. So transit will continue to fund some additional bus shelters and then also some ADA improvements on the bus routes. And we'll continuing, as I talked about, the legislative advocacy for the energy. Your final strategic priority was the dedicated Parks and Recreation resources. And this budget includes some money to update the city's Parks and Open Space Plan in order to be competitive for some of the RCO grants. You actually need to have an updated, and it would align very much with our comprehensive plan as well. And then making sure that we're starting the conversation to maximize partnerships when it comes to Parks and Recreation. When we talk about pressure on the general fund, our Parks and Recreation, we have a lot of unmet community wants for sure, and making sure we're starting the process to have a community conversation about new revenues and what the community priorities are in this, to look at the potential for new revenues and make sure that we're staying ahead. We've also made some commitments to have a match for the tennis courts if they're funded through the RCO grants. And then the West Ellensburg Park Playground, there's dollars for capital improvement, which is equipment for playground replacement in West Ellensburg Park in there. The Unity Park Visitor Center, it's one of the things, one of the goals of our staff is to make sure we can have an active space. So we're proposing through the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee that we actually fund a visitor center at Unity Park. And so again, try to maximize the use of some of our special revenue. And then one of the changes we made is we had some money saved for the Adult Activity Center for a van replacement to the tune of about $100,000 in lieu of adding the staff that were requested, because staff are very expensive. We settled on actually replacing using a rental for the Adult Activity Center van that's not used every single day. It's used pretty infrequently. And I don't know, Central Transit actually has a rental program that might serve better long-term. And rather than doing that, making investment in a UTV to actually expand the work and the capability of our parks maintenance folks to be more efficient and to actually do their work in two different places more efficiently. So trying to make thoughtful investments and recommendations. For organizational priorities, we also need to look always internally to the city organization. We talked a little bit about the reorganization and looking at pressure relief. As we looked at the new positions, we had really proposals from across the city departments saying we need some additional help. And so we said, what can we do instead? Where are our pressure points? And so where can we slow down? Where can we take some pressure off? And so there's been a fair amount of discussion about how to best do that. One of the things we've been talking about too is, again, transitions in technology. I've talked a little bit about that. The telecom utility is also, again, it's a utility, it's an enterprise fund. And there are opportunities for partnership out there that we haven't really ever staffed. It's been staffed with less than 1/10 of a person long-term. We don't have great lease rates and somebody to manage partnership opportunities. And so this budget does propose a new position that would be funded for 2 years in that telecom utility, act as a business manager to get our telecom off the ground so we can maximize those partnership opportunities. And it's making some investments in cybersecurity. We went through an audit with the state auditor's office, and so making some strategic investments there as well. And it's continuing the process of saving money to replace our enterprise resource planning software, which are the financials of our organization, and also in our GIS system, and then for our asset management, looking at where all of the things Brian Cortese, when he was presenting the wastewater treatment plant, making sure that we're tracking and mapping all those assets, and then we can manage those better. So using information long-term better to manage our work. And so organizational effectiveness is also always an important thing. And we talked about community engagement. And we always want to make sure that we're not getting behind with our employees, that we continue to be an employer of choice. We want people to enjoy their work here. We want them to be paid fairly, and we want this to be a great place to work. And so making sure that we don't get behind in our salaries based on what the needs of the community are. So the new positions, we've funded, I believe it's 6 new positions in this budget. One of those, several of those are related to the reorganization. Several are related to trying to take some pressure off and add some capacity. These are primarily, these are internal services and utility funded. We tried to limit any pressures or additional costs on the general fund. So the contracts and procurement is really an efficiency. We have a whole lot of really expensive employees like engineers doing bids. And so, and we have people and more there's a technical skill set going with contracts and procurement, and our city attorney also does a lot of work with our contracts and procurement. So it's really specializing that as we grow up as an organization, making sure that we start to specialize in some areas. And that was one area that was very well received by our staff. When we looked at the reorganization process. In our water treatment, we've grown as a community, and we haven't added capacity to our water tech team, essentially our operations team. And so adding a water utility person to help out with that system. They have been way busy, and that would take some pressure off as well. Our warehouse person with the supply chain issues and ongoing supply chain issues, we have one full-time person that's trying to buy stuff. And so there's a whole lot of other work that's not getting done. So making sure that we can sort of patch that hole and make sure that we're working more efficiently and we're getting all of our work done. We talked about the telecom, water stormwater program mentioned earlier. I think our stormwater program manager, John Morrow, I talked to you a little bit about the changes in the new stormwater permit. Those are going to require a lot of new programs, some monitoring, and so making sure that we're staffing up for that. Also, we have some retirements coming up, and so we've tried to take into consideration how to deal with those retirements. One of the things we've been talking about, we never really have had a water resources, and so someone that's dealing with water quality, it's really been absorbed by the folks in the shop, and trying to take some of that work in-house here. So when our stormwater manager retires, we actually create a water resources manager. And so that's funded by water and stormwater as well. And so the reclassifications are really primarily to accommodate for the changes with the reorganization, separating 2 departments out. Our IT telecom manager, again, that was a very small portion of that person's position, is reclassified to a network security. And a number of these, there's no net impact to the salary. And one of the big ones, and I'm not even going to make eye contact, our assistant city manager, city attorney is retiring this next year. And so that position would change into a city attorney position. And then looking at some promotional opportunities. One of the challenges with our part-time recreation aides is if they work over 70 hours a month on a regular basis, they have to be PERS eligible. And so we're trying to balance our need for that staffing and maximize that resource. But we have a couple positions that will move into the PERS eligibility as well. And we need to be sure to fund those. So I'm going to get into just an overview. This is the red in these next few graphs is going to be our revenues and transfers in, and the blue is the expenditures and transfers out. So when we look at those special revenue funds, these are what we're proposing for transfers in and the expenditures and transfers out. Sometimes the transfers out aren't, we're spending more. They're transfers into another fund to, for instance, do a project. And so these aren't always so telling. But again, these special revenue funds are those restricted funds. And what we're proposing to in 2025 is we do some reductions. What the finance director shared earlier is we typically use about $2.5 million that's transferred to street and arterial street for projects. Arterial street is the projects, street is street maintenance. And so often what we're trying to do is, as we need to reduce the reduce the expenditures, we're looking at reducing that for a year and reducing some of the service levels in our street maintenance temporarily as we look at new revenues for the future. For our debt service and capital funds, it's, always paying our debt and thinking about the expenditures. You'll see the field house over here. We're looking at the expenditures. And again, these are the 2 years combined. We don't have a lot of revenue coming in, but we do have some expenditures. We started the field house, the phase 1 validation phase for the design. We're going to need to come back and look at other revenues for that. And grants would be one of those revenue opportunities. All right. And then our enterprise funds, again, when we look at our utilities, again, oftentimes our electric utility is coming in. We've been saving up a little fund balance with our rates. And so we're doing the Dollar Way substation this next year. So you're going to see some pretty significant expenditures coming out of that. And that's why you're going to see, again, numbers higher in some areas. And then our internal services funds, we started the general facilities fund, and that is to try to provide a little bit of a savings account for maintenance. Our maintenance needs were so high this last biennium, and so we did adjust our rates up a little bit. So all of the services are paying a little bit more this year, but we have a lot of unmet needs. And so we know that that's an important thing to continue to save for and manage differently. And that's also one of the new positions, is actually to make sure we have a staff person that's managing that fund and accountable for that. Our health benefits fund is coming in a little higher. You're going to see this in future versions of the budget. When you see the budget ordinance reducing this down, one of the big changes this year is we've been self-funded for 10, 12, and over a decade with our health benefits. It's a fairly small pool, just over 100. And when you have if you have a couple of very expensive claims that can really impact in coming out of COVID. If you recall, we actually added from our COVID dollars, from our ARPA dollars, we put about between $600,000 and $700,000 into that fund. Otherwise, our city costs would have gone up. And so again, to meet those fund balance requirements, our employee costs would have gone up tremendously. And so to continue to fund, it was one of the decisions we made, and we've been working with our unions to make some changes to our benefits. And so this fund eventually, over the next couple of years, will actually be transmitted back to the funds that it came from. And the dollars that each of the staff needs, they'll be billed directly for their benefits rather than transferred to this fund and managed through that. So it's going to save us some pretty significant administrative work over time too. So joining a larger pool. So we're looking at the AWC pool, which is about 35,000 members, I think. So. All right. And capital projects, there are always things we need to continue to invest in our infrastructure, in our community. There's a number of projects. This is a very short list of those. And so our Anderson Road sewer project has been on the books for a couple of years. We've had to break that down in 2 pieces. We've run into some contaminated soils, and the project has gotten a lot more expensive. We're working to resolve that and make sure that we can actually get that built. Long term, it's going to save us some money on maintenance and future repairs, as well as removing a lift station out of our system. So, and creating a loop. So that's a really important investment. A lot of these, if you'll see a star, that means there's some grant dollars supporting these investments again. And you'll see a water street overlay this next year. Staff have been fantastic about getting grants. We've used our local dollars to match, and that's why some of the dollars that we've added to the arterial street over the last couple of years, it's been to serve as some of those matches. And then, and so again, I don't think we have dollars that have been ill spent. We spent them on really good things. And if you look around the community, you can see lots of amazing street projects that happened over the last few years. So continuing our sidewalk repair program, continuing the Helen Avenue extension, looking at the design for that, our Delaware substation we talked about. Field house design is partially grant funded. We know that we're going to continue that conversation with the community. And there is some funding in the budget to have a consultant help us with some of that community outreach and those discussions as well, and to continue a lot of our other programs. All right, our sales tax support, and here's where I want to get kind of into the balancing act. And that is over our history, and the red slide is the 2024, and this is where our sales tax support goes. And so these are the levels for 2024. Those are standard levels. For 2025, what we're doing was proposing that we retain more of the sales tax for the general fund, and the same for 2026, that we reduce for the next couple of years the sales tax transfer. And we looked back, and I don't have a slide on this, 5 years ago, the amount of money that went to the street fund was about $1 million. And so we've increased that quite a bit over the last few years, and we need to find a way to bring that down. And then again, debt service is a flat standard, and out of our sales tax, our policy also has a fund for the arts acquisition fund. There's a minimum, a floor of $25,000 and a ceiling of $50,000, and so continuing to fund that as part of our policy as well. So part of how we balance the budget is redistributing those dollars. And as I mentioned, one of the big challenges is we have done an amazing job. This is a picture of Gateway. You've all seen this. It's a stormwater project, very innovative. We hosted the Commissioner of Public Lands last week, and was very impressed. It's really cleaned up the Gateway into our community, provided multimodal options, getting bikes off the streets. And then also, what it also does is we're really great at building things. We don't always think and plan for how we maintain them. And so this and many other projects have added to, for instance, our parks. They actually will maintain this, and so they'll sweep and make sure that this is cleared with snow. And so when we're doing sidewalk projects that don't have an owner, for instance, up Brick Road, and so we've got some Fenning Road sections, our Fenning Road pathway so we're adding the need for maintenance. And that's why, again, we shifted to that UTV for maintenance to make sure that we can do kind of a west side and an east side to be able to make sure we can maximize the use of our utility. I digressed a little bit because when we're talking about streets, and so as we looked at balancing the budget, we said, our transportation system, where might there be some capacity to move some things around? And the transit was one of those. Transit has been building fund balance for a number of years. We've been great at getting state and some federal grants. We believe those will continue. We know that transit is one of those with the state's energy and climate goals, transit is really hard. We believe the state will continue to invest in transit, as a short story. And we looked at, staff looked at the projections, and we believe that transit could continue to operate over the next 10 years, again, on 0.1% as opposed to 0.2%. So our recommendation, as we looked at the street maintenance budget, and I've just mentioned this again, the Transportation Benefit District, cities can only, they're only authorized to create revenues that are given to us by the state. The Transportation Benefit District is allowed to, the council can actually do 0.1% is in a councilmanic fashion, but it has to be the first 1/10. By law, you're allowed to do up to 0.3%. Generally, communities spend Transportation Benefit District dollars on streets. It's rare that it's actually used for a transit system. And so there's another mechanism. It's a transit benefit area typically that's used for this. And so our recommendation, again, I mentioned it at the very beginning, is to bring this back to the voters, not to take away from the current configuration, but the TBD, the Transportation Benefit District, was set to expire after 10 years, which would be September of 2026. And our recommendation is to bring that to the voters early and do a revenue neutral renewal that would actually allocate 1/10 of that for streets, for street maintenance, and 1/10 for transit. So when I talked from the beginning, and I'm almost done, I appreciate everybody sticking with me here. We talked about this is an adaptive budget. Some of the tools that we use to balance this budget, we worked very hard. Our directors, we asked them to come back and say, what can we preserve in 2024? We're trying to shrink down some of our expenses so we make sure and have a good carryover into 2025. We looked at maximizing the use of the restricted revenues. One of those, again, would be a transit for the future. And in other areas is looking at, was there another option that we could use for funding through a special revenue? And so, for instance, the police department had some expenses that they were able to use to fund out of the criminal justice fund as opposed to the general fund. We did recommend reducing the chip seal if we have that reduction in the funding for the street maintenance program or street program. That does mean we have to do something. We have to shrink a little bit. And so looking at a 2-day service reduction, we've been doing chip seal about 4 days. We did almost 10 miles of streets. That was a lot this last year. And we did a lot more investment in the overlay as well, or in the ceiling that we put down. And so reducing that would be a reduction that we could tolerate certainly for a year or so. And so looking at our pool hours, the pool is fairly expensive. We added the Sundays back in. And so reducing, closing on Sundays and reducing some of those hours was a way to save some dollars as well. Not funding some of the equipment that has been proposed. We had to say no to a lot of different things. These are, again, just a highlight. One of the things we did is we slowed the pace of technology. We have lots of implementation projects. We can only do so much. And so we took a sharper pencil to how fast we were collecting for the dollars in order to make those investments. And so we're slowing down some of that pace. And so we're continuing to invest in arts and economic development. One of the ideas is with economic development, it's always the goal to make the pie bigger, make sure that we're trying to bring in new business, new revenues. And so continuing to invest in economic development, I believe, is really important. And with the EBDA, we're saving a service fee essentially to the EBDA, but we're continuing to invest in those things that will help us bring in revenue. And we're unable to fund, there's about a little over $1 million, $1.25 million for City Hall remodel. This is a 20-year-old remodel that we've done here. And so we just weren't able to fund it. There are some investments in the HVAC system we'll need to work on here. And we've got some leftover fund balance and that we'll be able to fund a portion of the library's HVAC system in one of our bond funds as well. So a number of positions were unfunded. One of those I didn't fund is the assistant city manager position with our assistant city manager, city attorney retiring. 2025 was a tight budget year, so we decided to forgo that. My goal would be hopefully to be able to find some revenue to bring that back in 2025. We have a lot going on here in this community, and bringing on a new department director as well. Eventually, we'll need to build back some capacity in that team. And so one of the other things that we did too is repurpose about $500,000 of the ARPA funds that were set aside for the Anderson Road Sewer Project. Those funds had been committed to that. We haven't moved them, but just because of the gap in funding for the general fund. So the one-time dollars were put in for 2025 into the general fund. And we talked about revoting the Transportation Benefit District. We also, work very hard to make sure we are reserving or preserving our fund balances. We have a general policy that we work to have about a 15% carryover. We are continuing right now. I think the numbers that we published are for ending fund balance for 2026 in the general fund was right near 12 or 13%. We believe over the next couple of weeks, as we continue to refine our data, we have some some dollars to move between the health benefits fund. We'll be able to preserve, all of those at 15%. And then our utilities generally is at 20%, preservation. So that's all I have for you. That is sort of the balanced budget as we prepared, and I would be available for any questions when council is ready.
Okay, the floor is open for testimony from the public. Anybody in the audience wish to make comments on this? There's nobody virtually. Mr. Kelleher? 5-minute timer this time. For real.
Pat Keller, 6530 Wilson Creek Road. The only thing kind of deep in the budget is I'd like you to consider on the tennis courts, committing to 8 courts, whether you get support from the county or the school district. The 6 courts, from my experience, doesn't work out as well, and 8 courts makes the project a winner. Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience? Seeing none, nobody online. Staff have anything to add?
I do not.
Council, questions for staff and or the public? Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna ask some deep questions here, so feel free to at least mark these and then come back and provide comment to me later. The Gateway 2 project, that's on an Imperial Street project. I'm just interested as far as the scale of that scope. We've got a pretty large earmark associated for that, projected in 2026. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to look at that project. I know, let's see, on the visitor center concierge desk at Unity Park, I'm just kind of interested in what the operation will look like, if that's going to be during the weekend, weekdays, what that looks like, and what kind of partnership or operation does the chamber play into that piece. You already talked about the pool reduction hours, and I think that's it for right now.
Okay.
Simple
So-
stuff.
I will tackle the Gateway project. Gateway 2 is from, and Ryan, you're going to have to correct me. It's to the city limits basically, and
It's Vista.
Vista, is it? Yeah. Sorry.
Back to about the fire station encompasses Lyle Creek.
Okay.
Yes.
There'll be a gap up on the hill is the problem. Everything that drains towards Lyle Creek is encompassed as part of this project. There'll be a little gap that was reflected the Gateway 3 on top of the hill, but they're in that Vista neighborhood.
Gotcha.
And it's a water quality grant.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
It's primarily
This is mostly grant funded.
mostly grant funded, and then our utilities will do some work in there. So those are utility funded as well. And so, so again, primarily grants and utilities. but-
Okay. All right. I'm interested in why it wouldn't show out as a grant then and just show the actual cost to the city as opposed to the grant.
What you're seeing in the packet are the enhancements, and so it's going to be the total cost of the project.
Understood.
And then if I could respond to your Unity Park.
Yeah.
What we've proposed, and we've talked with the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee on this, is doing a request for proposals. It could be that the chamber, or it could be that the Downtown Association might be interested in staffing the concierge space. And we have specific hours, some weekend hours and some weekday hours, seasonal, that would be staffed. And we thought that'd be an effective way to try it for a year.
Mhm.
And the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee was supportive of that.
Okay. Oh, I do remember. The other one was regarding the substation frontage improvements. I saw the substation improvements as a separate line item, but give me some details on the frontage improvements.
So the city has to follow our own development rules. And so we have to do frontage improvements on projects as well.
So it's not landscaping, this is hardscaping, it's probably storm erosion control, all that. Okay, sidewalks, yep. Okay, and I'm sure I'll have a question later on, but I'll ask you separately. Thank you.
Everybody else good? And you're not looking for any action on this. This was just a public hearing for
Tonight
public
is a
hearings
public hearing,
purposes.
correct. We will come back with a budget ordinance at your next meeting, and that would require 2 readings.
Okay, the public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed and we have no discussion, well, we can have discussion, but we're not going to deliberate anything. Okay, item 8C. The purpose of this hearing is for the city council to consider adoption of resolution 2024-29, which would declare city-owned parcel 955-272, which is commonly known as the Airport Incubator Building, as surplus for the public benefit of affordable housing. The hearing is now open. Everyone has an opportunity to be heard. City clerk is recording the proceedings. If you wish to participate virtually, raise your virtual hand, *9 on your cell phone. Wait till we've unmuted you. State name, address, speaking for yourself, group or both. Speak slowly and clearly. One person speaks at a time. Testimony must only address the matter under consideration, and questions for staff are to be directed through council. And it's a 5-minute time limit with more time available at the end. Before we begin, before we hear from the audience, is there a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Terry Weiner, Assistant City Manager and City Attorney. Last month, with the adoption by your council of ordinance 4944, you provided for the dissolution of the EBDA, and part of that dissolution process was to transfer the assets of the EBDA back to the city, in essence. That's in process. Almost all the assets have been transferred by the EBDA, with, I think, the exception of the cash assets, because as there are still accounts receivable and payable that need to be addressed, we needed to maintain those cash assets under the EBDA organization. But one of the assets that was transferred of some value was, of course, the Airport Incubator Building. Some of you may know that was constructed in 1999 and 2000 through a grant, or excuse me, a loan from the Community Economic Revitalization Board of the state, CURB grant it's called. That grant was jointly guaranteed by the city and the county. So now that we have that back, it's for the time being solely owned by the city. There was a bill of sale that was executed between the EBDA and the city towards the end of last month. That building is located up off of Bowers Road. You're probably all familiar with that general area. And it's actually on land leased from Kittitas County. It's on a long-term lease that now is set to expire in 2035. That's a little bit unusual to have a building sort of severed from the land underneath it. So the plan has been in the works to, in the future, transfer that to the county to have them as part of their economic development plan for the airport area, own and operate that Airport Incubator Building. Right now, there are 3 lessees in the building with active leases. We've sort of assumed control of collecting the rents for those leases, while the city has temporary, I would sort of refer to it as temporary ownership of the building. But you may recall at the meeting where the ordinance was initially considered for the dissolution of the EBDA, there was also an interlocal agreement that was considered and approved between the city, the county, and CWU for sort of a tripartite transfer of properties. That's summarized on page 87 of your packet. The order, it's not really in any particular order, but the transfers, the 3 transfers would be that the Airport Incubator Building, as part of that interlocal agreement, would be transferred from the city to Kittitas County. The leases will then be assigned as part of that to the county. The county in turn will take the necessary steps to surplus the transfer of title to a airport hangar at Bowersfield to CWU for expansion and continued operation of their aviation program. And CWU in turn will take the necessary steps to surplus a parcel of property that they have up at 18th and Helena, approximately to create approximately 6.2 acre parcel out of that would be transferred to the city for use and development of affordable housing or any other authorized municipal purpose. The first step for all of these is for the city to now surplus the Airport Incubator Building for transfer at a later time. That transfer is not occurring tonight. because we want to make sure that we have the other pieces in place. The other two transfers being between CWU and the county and CWU, and then the CWU to the city. So there is a disposal process that is authorized in the resolution you have before you tonight. It's referred to as a special disposition process. It's summarized there in your agenda packet. I will note that in the resolution itself on page 89, when this was drafted, we were hopeful and sort of anticipating that that there would be the other transfers to be considered at the same time, but in checking with the county and CWU, they're still not far enough along in the process, obviously, to have that done tonight. So section 4, which authorizes the execution of an agreement for the exchange of properties and delegates that authority to the mayor and city manager, should really not be part of the resolution tonight. That's my error. I apologize for that. I would ask that when you consider this resolution, that if it gets a first and second reading, a first and second to consider it, that you amend it by deleting section 4, because we are obligated to bring that agreement back when it's ready to be considered by council at a future date, when those transactions with CWU and the county are finalized. So with that exception to the resolution, the staff recommendation is to consider, I said first and second movement for approval of resolution 2024-29. And I'm available to answer any questions at the appropriate time in the hearing.
Floor is open to testimony from the public. Opportunity to address the council in this period, 5 minutes, more time at the end. Anybody in the audience? Mr. Kelleher, nobody virtually.
Pat Kelleher, 6530 Wilson Creek Road. I'd sure like to know what the curb loan restrictions are going to be on Kittitas County to use the building under the guarantee. What exactly is the asset being transferred? Airport incubator building does not sound like a legal term to me. I'd just like to see a more legal description. Square footage. Nothing is being received from the county to the city for the transfer of the subject assets. The document that you signed before and entered into did not make the transfer, the three-parte transfer, contingent on transfer. Each of them were what you signed, what you agreed to, allowed the transfers independently. So you're not receiving anything in compensation from the county, which you can go through a public hearing and you can give stuff to the county. There's a procedure for that. Now, allegedly, the property values are relatively comparable. Really? Where are their appraisals? I mean, were appraisals done, or you just go, God, those look the same. I mean, you're talking three varied assets. I'd sure like to see how they were valued. Especially the alleged CWU 6.2 acre parcel at 18 in Helena. It doesn't exist. To form this parcel would require extensive site improvements per city development code. If this scheme was proposed by a private developer. Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience for testimony? Staff have anything to add?
Not at this time.
Nobody in the audience, non-repetitive information? Council, do you have questions of staff or the public? Start on the left side this time. Okay, now we'll go right.
No questions.
No, I'm good.
Public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Council may begin its discussion and deliberation in this matter.
Just a FYI, I'll abstain from this because of the future intent associated with my association with CW on this matter.
I will make the motion to adopt resolution 2024-29 declaring as surplus the city's needs, the Ellensburg Airport Incubator Building, amending the resolution to delete section 4.
Okay.
So I have a motion second to move resolution 2024-29, declaring a surplus to the city's needs, the Ellensburg Airport Incubator Building, with the deletion of section 4. Is there any discussion?
I just want to respond to Mr. Kelleher. The legal description is in the resolution with an address and lot number and all of that.
Any further discussion? Except for abstentions, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Two will vote aye, opposed. And please note, Councilmember Palmer's abstention. Okay. Nothing on 9 or 10. We move to item 11A, which is the third quarter 2024 financial status and investment reports. Ooh, more finance. Cool.
Thank you. You guys are probably feeling like all these numbers are going to be drilled into your head, but.
One part of the meeting is kind of over. Saying.
Depends on your perspective.
Been a long time since it's been part of it.
Hour and a half.
And this is page 98 in the packet.
Yep, beginning on page, you said 98, 90, something like that.
98.
98 old, 91 on the new.
On the new one, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Of your, are the third quarter 2024 financial
Try to give me an updated
status and
agenda.
investment reports for the period ending September 30th of 2024. These third quarter reports were presented to the Finance Committee at the October 22nd meeting. Table 1, like always, shows you our revenues and expenditures for the general fund, actuals in blue, year-end projections in red, and budget in green. These should line up with the presentation I did on revenue sources. We are expected to come in below budget for expenditures and slightly above budget for revenues. I'll talk a little bit why that is later. Presentation. Table 2 shows you the year-to-date revenues remitted through the state of Washington. Overall, third quarter revenues distributed through the state for sales tax activity was up 1%. It's down from the 3% it was up in second quarter. Overall, the revenues are also up. The revenues in total distributed through the state are also up by 1%. Of significance, the city's assistant, which is a portion of the state's real estate distribution, made a recovery over 2023, but it's still down compared to 2022. Hotel motel tax also has continued to stay up above 2023, while liquor and the motor vehicle fuel tax have decreased. Table 3 shows governmental fund tax revenues by type. So overall, our governmental fund tax revenue is projected to exceed budget by approximately $371,000 or 1.86%. In sales tax projections, we used a 0 to 1% increase over 2023, as that's where we sat at the end of third quarter. B&O tax projections used a range of 0.75% decrease up to an 18% increase over 2023, depending on the specific utility. Other taxes is projecting a decrease in excise tax. However, like I stated before, the hotel motel tax is still holding strong and projected to come in over budget. Table 4 breaks down the difference of budgeted less projected by tax purpose. So overall sales tax is projected to come in slightly over budget or by around 32,000. However, the general fund retail sales tax that you see there on the fourth line down, it's the only one that's not restricted, and it is projected to come in under budget by about 225,000. The 2% increase that we used at the end of last quarter or second quarter projection was probably a little bit overly optimistic, which I think I spoke about at that time, that I was afraid that it was like a one-time bump due to a one-time sell, and continued research shows that it probably was. And so we've dropped back down to the 1% over. Table 5 digs further into sales tax by activity. It shows the year-to-date sales tax activity compared to the previous 2 years. Overall, January through September, we're up 1.36%. However, keeping in mind that at the end of second quarter, we were up 3.3%. So it's continued to go back down. Overall, the retail trade had seen the highest dollar decrease, which is the one that we like to follow the most. It's usually the most steady. And the others column is showing the highest dollar increase. Regular retail sales tax revenue had a 2.9% overall decrease under the same period, which was down from a 0.4% decrease at the end of second quarter. Those one-time sales that I talked about in second quarter were ones under manufacturing and information.
Yep. Can I ask?
You can ask questions.
Not a hearing.
Okay, all right. I love to hear that a little bit more about that success around manufacturing. What is that attributed to, that pretty significant gain?
Well, I can't say on the specific businesses or whatever that they are. That's all information from the state that I have to sign a disclosure, confidentiality disclosure things, but it appears to be a one-time sell. It was a business that was reported once and only once, it looks like. So that's why we figured it may be something that was maybe purchased online or something of the sort. And
Okay, so this is not a reoccurring benefit that we can attribute to, say, light industrial.
that's what we were hoping at the end of second quarter, but.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. I think I spoke about that a little bit more, that they were, appear to be off, one-off purchases and probably won't continue. These revenues again are for sales from November through July. Table 6 shows the year-to-date utility tax activity. Again, we talked about this a little bit in the previous public hearing on revenue sources, but overall, the utilities have seen an overall increase of 11.81%, which, like we talked about, some of that has to do with delayed revenue from 23 to 24, as well as building code changes and plant investment fee increases. The city delayed the billing, like I talked about. And the telephone tax and cable taxes will continue to go down until they're gone. Sorry, I feel like this is a repeat of like the third thing tonight. Table 7 shows the general fund revenues and expenditures. This table does not include the managerial funds. So overall, the column on the far right, which is your budget less projected, the top section of revenues were expected to come in over budget by about 1.36 million. Majority of that being in the miscellaneous column, which is due to the interest that we've earned on our investments. And then the increase in taxes happens to be from the utility taxes received. And of course, charges for services is up a little bit too, which is interfund charges. The expenditures on the bottom half on the far right, we're expected to come in under budget by about 1.78 or 1.8 million. This again is due to a lot of temporary staff vacancies, as well as some controlled planned underspending by all of the departments. Heidi has asked all the departments while we prepared our 25-26 budgets to be really conscientious. We're going to try to save as much as we can. in spending at the end of this year so that we have fund balance to carry over to cover us through 25 and 26. So if you look at the original budget, it was planned to spend about 1.3 million of fund balance in the general fund. And right now our 24 projected is to bring over an additional 1.8 million of fund balance. Table 8 shows the current bonded debt. There is no change from second quarter. We'll make our principal and interest only payments in November. So this will change at the end of fourth quarter. But overall, the general obligation debt activities, we have a balance of about 7.7 million, and we have debt payments coming up totaling around 767,000, with revenue bonds totaling about 23.6 million and about 1.8 million in bond payments coming up in November. This table shows the city brought in at approximately 2.9 million more than it spent so far in 2024. However, 4.2 million of that excess of revenue over expenses is from the utilities and internal service funds. The general fund, which includes the managerial funds that you see there in blue, saw a net loss of 2.36 million so far this year. This loss did include 2 million, though, of state and local fiscal recovery fund spending. So the actual loss to the rest of the general fund is about 360,000 so far this year. As far as our investments go, the city had about 87 million in investments, with about 65.6 million of that in LGIP at the end of third quarter. We earned around 65,000 in interest in September. So far, through September, we've earned about 2.95 million in interest for the first 9 months. We did have a few recent maturities in the last couple of months. I have not reinvested those, although I would like to, because rates are even higher this week than they were last week. I'd like to get some of those reinvested in 1 to 5 years. However, we're waiting till we finish preparing the budget and seeing where we are on cash flow and seeing what individual funds have fund balance that it looks like will last for the 1 to 5 years. Staff recommends council accept the quarter reports as presented, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, questions of staff? Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak? We see no one. Council, do we have an action?
Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I got the last one.
No,
Your
please.
turn.
You were already halfway there.
You need to go on the record, David, so you matter.
All right, since I missed half the presentation, I'll do this. So I, Mr. Mayor, move that council accept the third quarter 2024 financial statement status and investment reports as presented.
Second.
Motion second to accept the third quarter 2024 financial status and investment reports as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Opposed? Excuse me. None, and so that motion passes. We're on to item 11B, which is council-funded programs, 2025 grant awards. Again, there will be an opportunity for public comment, and we're getting close.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, Hetty Burns-Runaway, City Manager. You have before you recommendations for 2025 funding for the council-funded grant program. By your policy, the council-funded grants include 0.3% of the sales tax from the previous year to be spent for community grants program, by which our subcommittee of the council actually makes the recommendations. The Parks Partnership grants, where the Parks and Recreation Commission makes recommendations. Historic Preservation grants, the Landmarks and Design Committee makes recommendations. And then the water quality grants, and that's funded actually through the stormwater utility at $10,000 per year. And the Environmental Commission makes recommendations. In your packet is an overview of those grant programs, the requests that came in and the recommendations from each of those bodies. And also, in addition, there was a request for a little bit of background on the council-funded grants. And so there's an addition that was added to the dais to provide a little background for that. And so, and this can be passed with one motion to approve the grants for as recommended.
Council, any or actually, yeah, let's go. Council, any questions to staff? Comment from the audience? Nope. Okay. Then we have motion.
I'll move that the council award the recommendations and authorize the 2025 grant funding awards in the amount of $18,523.54 for the community grants, the park partnership, and the historic preservation programs, and 10,000 for the water quality grants.
Seconded. Motion second to approve the grants as indicated in our packet for 18,523 and $10,000 for water quality for 2025. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye, opposed. That motion passes. We move to item 12A, managers report. No public comment.
Actually, 11C on the amended agenda.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Weather shelter got moved.
I should have taken your advice. I'm just saying. We're going to do item 11C, which is the 2024-25 cold weather shelter facilities grant, and there will be an opportunity for public comment. Page 114.
Thank you.
I'm not going to doubt you again.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a brief report to provide. This item comes before you. We received on October 23rd, the agreement with the county for a rental of the Kittitas Valley Event Center. And if you recall, the Kittitas Valley Ministerial Association has operated the cold weather shelter for about 10 years. And last year said that this was their last time. There has been a cold weather shelter action team that's been working that includes members of the county and the city and some other nonprofits to stand up a cold weather shelter for the season. We looked at facilities and exhausted a number of facilities throughout the summer. And finally landed on the event center and the Western Village Broome. It was a 2,000 square foot facility with a commercial kitchen, restrooms, and actually had showers adjacent as well. All of the other items or all the other properties we had looked at required some very significant investment, capital investment to make them work. And so this was the definitely the preferred item. The operations, there was an RFP that was put out for operations. Hope Source was awarded that and has an agreement with the county, and the county is actually paying the operations for the facility. And I can't find the exact number of that. It was right near $170,000 for this season. So the season generally operates from mid-November through mid-March, and so the Kittitas Valley Event Center director, I spoke with her today, and she walked me through the justification for the cost. So again, we did receive this on the 23rd of October. They apologized. There was some confusion about who is sending this to the city. And so that was after your last meeting. The charge, which is adopted for the facility, is $800 per day. That's their adopted charge. They looked at options for long-term leases, and they saw other comparables as very different across communities. Some were quite large, some were quite small. So they settled on a 25% like long-term lease option. And so that number with the number of days, which actually exclude the number of days in February where the facility won't be available, with the amount of $74,400. They have made some upgrades to the kitchen. They're needing to do some plumbing changes for the ice machine in order to accommodate the rental for the facility. And again, let's see here, what else? I think that's it. And so again, this was on your on your consent calendar. We had a request to remove that, and that can be done by any council member. And it's an opportunity for you all to talk through. I can answer some of the questions we asked the event center staff. They weren't able to make it to the meeting tonight. We have some additional, we could likely field some questions from you. So the recommendation is for to approve the lease agreement with the Kittitas Valley Event Center for the space for the cold weather shelter. And again, the lease would take effect as of the 1st of November. So that is previous to this meeting through, I believe it's through the end of March.
And just to confirm, the operational cost is through the county.
That is correct.
Any other questions for staff?
And what fund is this coming from?
So this would be the Affordable Housing Sales Tax
Big
Fund.
pot.
And then I would add, one of the things we've been talking about is making sure that we have our cold weather action team continues to meet and making sure that this is a successful adventure. This is the first time, again, the city and county have had this specific role in that, and making sure that there's a good, there's accountability for actions and operations throughout the season.
I had one quick question.
Go ahead.
I was just curious on the 5 days in February where the facility won't be available. Have we, I know it's not related to this agreement, but do we have a plan for those 5 days?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
This looks like a standard agreement for the event center
is.
leasing.
It is. And again, we were confirmed that their standard rate is the $800 a day for the facility.
No further questions? Anybody in the audience?
I'm here on behalf of myself and other people that I know that have horses that have expressed concerns about some of the buildings surrounding the facility. I volunteered at the cold weather shelter because it's what I like to do. And I went to the training, so I've looked over the facilities on Friday. And my concern in the contract is, and I talked to the county about this, the contract and the wording. And I'm perhaps disappointed, or perhaps this is an issue for the cold weather action team to discuss, but the leasee is actually the city, right? And Heidi's going to be authorized to sign this if I'm understanding this. But Hope Source, I'm looking in this spiraled booklet instead of the agenda I was looking at online earlier. I got different page numbers than the other one. But in 57 of this bound booklet, under 1F additional terms, responsibilities of licensee, that would be the city of Ellensburg. Hope Source is to make sure people stay within the fence of the licensed area listed in 1C2 and do not travel outside or around the facility into other areas of the Kittitas Valley Event Center. All event center property not listed in 1C2 is prohibited 24/7 from shelter users. Now, those would be the people that actually check into the facility. They say that there's going to be 30 people. I don't know if that includes the volunteers. Still, it would be 26, which according to the church capacity, that would be plenty to cover our routine people if we don't attract more people. Well, the horse people are concerned about those outbuildings, the barns in A1A subsection 1. To ensure this, all barn areas on the rodeo grounds, director barns, posse barns, stalls, etc., as well as underneath the grandstands and other surrounding facilities will be required to be inspected daily. Daily, I kind of take that to mean once a day, as there is a high risk of shelter users trying to stay in the barns while not in the cold weather shelter. The wording in that and the next one make me think that they're just thinking of doing this look through the barns in the morning. I think that's a mistake. If found, subsection 2, if found, any debris, containment, or waste left behind by shelter users in the barns will be required to be cleaned up by Hope Source. That's all fine, but I'm concerned about the evening shift. If you have people that you're turning away from the shelter because it goes beyond capacity, I don't know how much this is going to be advertised. Word gets out amongst the homeless community. I know in the churches, we had a problem with them showing up to use the shelter because they heard that we had great vouchers for the holidays for them. So they'd come and they'd try to get hotel vouchers, which we couldn't afford. So then but it might be different with the government. You might attract other people, especially the first month. They're going to feed them with restaurant food because the kitchen won't be ready. And so I would ask that they look at that PM night sweep. You could use city resources, the police. I would be concerned about safety of people in there looking down there from Hope Source after dark. I myself wouldn't want to walk in there, but if they can see them, then they can call the city police and maybe the city could use a police officer.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
I was at the county housing, what is it, the Homeless and Affordable Housing Commission meeting today, making my usual stink about things. Nancy Goodlow was there, saw it. I referred to all this as happening at the events center, and I was corrected by a commission member saying it was Western Village. And I'm just curious, which one is it? You guys are referring to it as the events center, and the commission is referring to it as something else. Nobody's got an answer? Nobody can answer. I don't know.
Can I respond?
Yeah, it's managed by the same entity. It's a subsection of the same facility.
She just made a big stink out of correcting me on it, so it seemed like something.
Well, we didn't. So
No, I'm here and you guys are here, so I was just looking for clarification. Okay.
That was response, Commissioner Watson.
thank you. Anybody else? Okay, council.
Pat Kelleher, 6530 Wilson Creek Road. Few comments. One is, first, the proposed contract does not include the north bathrooms and showers. Your contract, responsibilities of licensee, Hope Source is to make sure people stay within the fence of the licensed area listed in 1C2 and not to travel outside or around the facility in other areas of the Kittitas Valley Event Center. And those are outside the fence. As to the previous question, they go into any advertisement you do is to refer to the event center specifically. Second, has the city inspected the site for ADA compliance? Further, the city has no obligation to provide emergency shelter. The county has no obligation to provide emergency shelter. This proposal costs too much. Using past 2-year average daily use, this 124-day shelter will cost $240 per guest per day. I support what the city of Ellensburg's policy has been for the past 10 years and will be your future emergency shelter policy 124 days from now. Not providing any emergency shelter. My reasoning is not because of the outrageous cost. I oppose providing emergency shelter restricted solely on the time of day is inhumane to the human spirit. A meal in a shelter for the night is an outdated Skid Row recruiting model used to save souls. Accept a sober life in chores, and you can receive 3 meals in 24-hour shelter. The city of Ellensburg is making no offer of 24-hour shelter. Do it right or don't do it at all. Thank you.
Okay. 3 minutes.
Comments, I'm sure enough. I forgot about the reason the PM sweep is so important is perhaps because of the fire hazard. I don't know if you realize, but if anybody bunks and sets up as an overflow, and if they have lighters, there's supervision within the facility, our cold weather shelter, that they're going to be supervised during smoke breaks. There won't be any fires happening there, but in those barns, they could, from cigarettes, cannabis smoke, Suboxone if they're drug users, and methamphetamine, they all require lighters. There is really concern. I would like the city to look at their insurance policy. I don't know the details of it, but will it cover that extra if there is, the way this is worded, the overflow into that area if it does occur? We don't know what type of clients we're going to attract as opposed in the churches. That was one of the concerns why I can't.
Okay, council.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. I was the troublemaker that folded off the consent agenda. Just a couple of things.
So let's get a motion so that we have something to talk about first.
Well, I'll go ahead and move the city manager authorize the city manager to sign the contract with Kittitas Valley Event Center leasing space for the 2024-25 cold weather shelter.
I'll second that.
So a motion second to authorize the city manager to sign the contract with Kittitas County Event Center for the 2024-2025 cold weather shelter.
Thank you. So I pulled this to talk about it for two reasons. One, this has been something of great community involvement and concern. I thought it deserved the ability for someone to come up and make public comment on it. We wouldn't have had that in the consent agenda. But we've known this was coming since at least June. And here we are with a contract that starts on Friday. It's Monday, the 4th. We have no ability realistically, other than to cancel the project as a whole by withholding funding from the facility. It puts us in a box where we can't negotiate a price. We can't say, hey, this in the contract doesn't make sense. I think the 1F is a great point where it says responsibilities of licensee, us. But we're supposed to govern Hope Source. Hope Source is being funded by the county. And so that's something I didn't quite understand. How are we supposed to govern an entity that we don't actually have a contract with, but the county does? And so it seems like that language probably should have landed on the county because they're on the operational side versus us ensuring that Hope Source is looking after the barns and doing the walkarounds and things like that. So, for me, it was about process, not project. So I want to be very clear about that. I've supported a cold weather shelter. Churches did it for 10 years, did a great job. I understand they're worn out. I've listened to them. And I'm for the project, but this kind of puts us in a spot where we can't push back on anything without just potentially blowing up the project. And it starts on the 15th. It's already occupied by Hope Source. So to me, I see that as an issue. We probably should never have gotten to this point. In corporate America, if I was handed a contract saying this started 3 days ago and you just got a chance to read it, you'd receive serious pushback. So I wanted to lay out those concerns, maybe get a couple of answers. I think that the responsibility of licensee on an entity that we don't have a contract with is an issue. And If we had had this a meeting or two ago, we could have worked through that, but because of the position we're in now, it's pretty much vote yes or, you know, stop the project to a degree. So that's why I pulled it out. I'd love to hear if anybody else has similar concerns to mine about the process part of this. But yeah, that's what I did.
Have we had a contract with Hope Source in previous 10 years when they were operating a cold weather shelter? Or any organization? To Jess's point.
No, Hope Source has only operated the cold weather shelter for 1 or 2 years. And that was with the county, not with the city.
Okay. And
And then the churches have contracted before with the county.
I get your technical concern there. I'm not as concerned as far as the intent of what we're trying to accomplish. I don't feel as though Hope Source will act maliciously on this important thing that the city and county are joined together. But I agree with you as far as the processes that there was definitely some misguidance and missteps on here. I do want to address some of the concerns that I heard from the public. We've discussed in many iterations of this, there is no perfect solution on this. This is going to be a situation that will continually evolve. I think that our police chief, our county sheriff will absolutely help us and ensure the safety and the protection of property around that. This is something that is a community effort. So I applaud the concerns and everything like that. Absolutely is something that we'll have to watch, but I think that all the right people are going to be at the table to ensure that all the property and assets are protected there, because no matter where this was, the fallout of that exact same thing would be happening with wherever people that are turned away from the shelter are, whether they're around park, where they're around houses, where they're around commercial property, the same concerns would happen. And we'd be engaging with our law enforcement services to help out serve some of those concerns. So that's my comments.
Any other discussion?
I was just going to respond to Mr. Kelleher's concern about the showers and the restrooms. The Hope Source in the city and the county are aware of that technical, that it's outside of the fenced area for the shelter, and a process I assume is in place for volunteers to accompany.
It was on the list of volunteer jobs is to supervise, but technically it's not in this lease document.
No, but Hope Source has its own contract with the county for the operations.
For the operation, this is just a
With the county for the operations, but so we're not leased. So they're just not saying we just don't need to lease that space.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are restrooms inside as well.
Yes. So, but I guess, good point, Josh, and I kind of agree. This responsibility of the licensee should be in the county's contract, not ours. Is there a way to, I'm assuming they've already signed their contract with Hope Source. So shifting this language into that contract is doable at this point. I mean, if we authorize you to sign in a substantially similar but negotiated form.
To sign with the amendment. Is that what you're saying? Sign with the amendment?
Sign, to attempt to work through and sign what you have to.
So if there's a substantial change, we can bring a version of this back. And I would say, I mean, I know that there was, what Katie told me today was that there was a lot of intent about trying to decipher whose responsibility things were. And so there are responsibilities in Hope Source's contract, and I actually don't have a copy of it sitting in front of me, so I can't do, but they have some responsibility for the grounds in that as well. So we can do some comparison. But yeah, if council provides, some direction on the terms, we can certainly work with the county on amending terms.
I agree that it's hard for us to enforce someone else to do something that we don't have a contract with. Mm-hmm. But so we're accepting responsibility for these actions with this contract.
So what does the motion need to look like to give you that direction? Because we've moved the contract. That's the motion that's on the table right now. Do we need an amendment?
Sounds
A vote on an amended agreement?
Sounds like it. Josh, you want to make?
Well, if if someone wants to make that motion and set forth what the amendment would be, and then we can certainly take that to the county and see. They're not obligated to accept it, but it's, on its face, it seems reasonable, but we just don't know.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like, really, it's a good point raised. Hope Source's responsibility, not the city of Ellensburg's responsibilities, right? So could we just strike that item and just refer
Could you be specific about which?
1F, 1A through whatever, and just indicate that 1 through C, that basically is with the exception, and it's complicated because when we start talking about bus stops, and of course we get involved with our central transit, but essentially, these are the responsibilities that the county and Hope Source have worked out largely. Is it superfluous to our agreement with the county?
So yes, we can ask the county to actually do a separate agreement with Hope Source for the terms, and then we can ask them to remove that from ours. So that likely would be, yes, if you have a motion on the table, so voting on an amended motion to remove section 1F1 in its entirety.
I'll work with you.
Yep. I guess the question is, if the county says no, we need to know and come back and
We'll
have a
probably
discussion.
bring this back at your next.
But it's all retroactive because the agreement effectively began, 3 days ago? Yeah, okay.
Somebody needs to make an amendment. Motion to amend.
I'll move to amend the main motion to delete items 1F1 from the agreement.
Second.
Motion second to remove items 1F1 from the Kittitas Valley Event Center resource agreement for cold weather shelter 2024-2025. Is there any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those against say no. I'll vote no. That motion passes. So we have an amended a motion to authorize the city manager to assign the amended contract. Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Opposed? That motion passes. Move to the manager's report.
I will refrain from repeating anything that's in the agenda. And we do have an executive session and we would ask for 5 minutes. There will be no action following the item.
Council member reports, 2 things only for each person. Sarah.
Okay,
2 only.
2 and 2 only. I just wanted to thank the Kittitas County Museum for their lecture series. I went to the Impactful Women. It was fantastic. All of my meetings are coming up this next week, so that's all. Oh, and downtown trick or treating was amazing. Just saying. Good job for our community.
I have no report, but I wanted to encourage with the election coming up tomorrow and in the interest of a peaceful transition to whoever is elected and community safety, I would ask the candidates to be sure that their signs are taken down according to a city ordinance, which I believe is within 8 days after the election, and persons who have signs on their private property to please do that the same.
And I also wanted just to speak to the election, just borrowing from advice from the Braver Angels organization. So if your side wins, please try not to gloat and remember that your neighbors are probably in mourning. And if your side loses, try to avoid the bitterness. And remember that the people who voted differently than you are not evil. They're just have a different perspective. And be patient because it might take a while to count. And if there's claims of fraud or whatever, it's going to work through the courts. And so just be patient with that process as well. So, thank you.
Councilmember Miller.
Two items, very brief. Finance and Ellensburg Academy. That's what I've done the last couple weeks.
My meetings are coming up and I voted for the comment destroying the earth. So I'm voting for comment. There we go. I'm just joking. That was a joke. Anyway, move on.
I've got no report this time.
So two real quick things. Attended a developmental disability meeting with employment agencies and was really impressed at the sort of the breadth and depth of those resources. We still need to try and help them out as a community. And then the second piece is just to tag on Nancy's comment. People are under no obligation to take down their political signs if they're on their private property. That's a request. That is not a rule. Public right of ways, it's a rule. Correct?
It's actually theoretically applies everywhere in the city, not just to the right of ways. It's
You can't
just
put
the way
something
we
up in your
control-
house.
We can control signage on
Okay, I didn't think we had any control over what people did at their house.
as long, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna say, yes, the
All
sign,
good.
last signers is 7 days after that.
Okay, my bad. I didn't understand that. Okay, we're going to an executive session, potential litigation. It's going to last 5 minutes, no action. And I should get back and adjourn.
Oh, yeah.